And today's talk will be covering, as I said, responsible advertising in the age of data privacy. And ultimately, there's four key sort of takeaways today and what we want to cover as far as today's session goes. So first thing is, how is consumer behavior changing and what are the different channels that are driving that growth? Secondly, it's all about privacy regulation, what's happening in the cookieless changes across the industry. Thirdly, we're going to look at ethics and consumer profiling, applications of AI and what's gone right and what's gone wrong. And then finally, it's, the key thing that matters here in all of this is how do we maintain, but also at the same time grow brand trust and what the reputational benefits are across that whole customer journey. So, today isn't going to be about mad men or mad women, but we are going to dive into, changing consumer behavior and the new digital channels that drive that growth. So if we reframe back to the industry, advertising and where we are currently, as well as marketing, the trust has never really been lower within the industry. As we can see, both retail and advertising or social media studies conducted by Harvard Business Review, we can really see that they are at the lowest. And we need to change this perception in the marketplace, but even work a lot harder to ensure that, we are trusted. Places like doctors, patient records, payment cards, banks, all these areas have trust baked right into their service offering and proposition, and that's what consumers see. And we need to work much harder to gain trust with consumers. And really, in today's world, digital advertising has really heightened the age of privacy. And that's really down to the fact that we now have one-to-one identification that's enabled by personal data, whether that's cookies, mobile ad IDs, anything that allows us to track individuals and target them on a one-to-one basis. And that allows us to really understand that consumer journey, but also track the effectiveness of the activities that are taking place. And today, data protection and consumer privacy regulations, continue to make data collection, using data, and development of user profiles very complex. And I really like John Wanamaker's quote here, and it's still true today. It's really, half the money spent on advertising is wasted, but the trouble is I don't know which half. And that still yields itself very true in today's world, even though we are having one-to-one identification of consumers. And digital has really brought the awareness and the heightened understanding of privacy right at the forefront of consumers. In this graphic, we can really see a key point in advertising spend, and digital spend this year is going to outpace traditional media for the first time. I think this is very powerful. These elements have only been increased due to COVID and media consumption, but as we can see, the red bars from 2019 onwards, we can see digital globally will be, much more in terms of spend and outpacing that traditional media. And as we can see, the orange bars, the yellow bars, the blue bars and green bars, they're all in decline. These are all traditional non-digital areas. And they're all sort of in decline year on year. Some are going up slightly, like outdoor, traditional outdoor. Again, it's quite important for us to realize that, digital is here to stay and it will continue to be here as time goes on. And more mature markets like Western Europe, China, as well as the United States, these numbers are around, 55+% on digital spend, which is already outpacing and outstripping traditional media. And what's really driving that growth in digital? There's sort of three main areas really that are driving that. So as we can see in the middle pie chart here, we can really see, out of digital, what is the share of wallet against different types of activities? And ultimately, the ones that are driving the most growth today and right now are social, lots of emerging new platforms. TikTok's recently started signing a licensing deal with WPP. And we see a lot of things coming out of China as well as on the global stage. And this is really fueling the way that consumers are consuming digital media and content as well. And then on the left-hand side, we're seeing, a massive rise in video. Things like OTT media, CTV devices, and these are some of those platforms. You could probably connect with yourself and think about, during this period of time that we've all been stuck at home, your consumption has gone up. You're probably subscribed to one or more of these channels. And then similarly on the top left, we can see audio is really kicking off as well. And, audio is a new channel where, consumers want to have content where they can consume that in different ways and different manners. And, audio and podcast are really leading the rise on some of those things. And, Clubhouse was a big one earlier in the year as well. So I wanted to make a reference to that. And, one of the things I want you to kind of think about through this is, think about some of your interactions. And is this kind of what you're seeing as well? And ultimately, these changes in digital consumption are requiring organizations to really embed trust and privacy at the forefront of everything that we're doing in the industry. And it's very key to note that. COVID has played a big role in rapidly accelerating some of these areas and bringing to light gaps within trust and privacy. And if we look to privacy regulation, we're going to dive into some of the things that we're seeing across the cookieless landscape and some changes that are happening across the industry. We can really see privacy regulation is shifting in the digital advertising landscape. There's new laws coming up in different areas, new jurisdictions. But as we can see here on the map, we have Canada, US as well, has many different states that are in the legislature discussing, various bills. We've also seen Colorado recently approve some of theirs as well. Virginia recently passed, and we know that CPRA is coming as well shortly. And more states are having these discussions, New York as well. I think there's around 23 to 30 different states that are in active debates around their own state privacy laws. So, regulation is shifting, and it's about how do we as businesses ensure that we're staying on top of that, but also serving the needs of the consumer, because a lot of these laws are different. Within Europe, we've always had the GDPR, and as well in the UK, the UK GDPR. These laws have been there, and they've sort of set the standard globally for the principles, the ethos, the rights, and overarching tenets and core elements of feeding into other regulations globally. And as we look to other markets in the East, Australia and APAC, they also have very much, robust data privacy laws that we all need to comply with. So as a global business, this makes it difficult, but at the same time, quite interesting to stay on top of these new laws and new ones coming up all the time. And as well, Brazil passing theirs at the end of last year with the LGPD coming into enforcement. I think the key thing to note here is, making sure that we are prepared, because these industries, digital is only going to continue to get regulated even more, and enforcement oversight is happening, as I'll get to on the other slides. So what does all of this mean for cookieless implications across the industry, right? On the left-hand side, we can see the dominance of the different browsers in terms of their market share. And we can clearly see that Google Chrome is, top in terms of the market share with Safari there. But as we already know, Microsoft Edge, Firefox, and Safari have already, taken off the ability for third-party cookies to coexist in those ecosystems. And also Google Chrome, as we all know, they'll also be supporting third-party cookies. So this has a multitude of implications. Everything from retargeting or remarketing, frequency capping, audience lists, bidding, pricing points. There's a lot of implications within the industry that relate to, effective targeting strategies, as well as the reporting side of things and measurement. Those are the key sort of implications that we see across the industry, and that's going to hit home for everybody. As we think about further implications across the industry and what kind of things are coming up within the industry as sort of alternatives or newer solutions that will meet the needs of all, we see a three-way addressability on the horizon. And a lot of you are probably familiar with those. So the first one is things like unified and universal identifiers. These are all based on user IDs. Some of them are consented, authenticated audiences behind paywalls that media owners will be implementing. Some of them take the format of deterministic, so really understanding that this is the individual with 100% accuracy, or utilizing things like probabilistic IDs, where it's a little bit more looser, using machine learning, other sort of properties to identify and make a match with high degree of accuracy, maybe not at 100%, but being able to tie that back. So that's sort of one area that's emerging on the addressability in the digital ecosystem. The second area is everything around contextual signaling. And a lot of advancement is being made here. Whether it's web page content being scraped to make decisioning quite quickly, understanding, the sentiment of a page. Is this a negative article? Is this positive? What are the specific elements within that? And this kind of extends towards brand safety, but more specifically around contextual and really targeting consumers on the types of content that they're reading and the areas that they're going to. The advancements here, that I'm looking forward to is how does this work within the video space, the image recognitioning space, and other environments like connected TV and over-the-top media. As we continue to go down that list, on the bottom left, we have audience cohorts. So Google Flocks is a great example of this. It's very transient, dynamic, and we can aggregate and look at groups, large groups of users that have an assigned preference to a specific type of category. And on the right-hand side, the cookieless toolkit is continuing to emerge and unfold. There's a lot of different solutions that are out there in the marketplace. You have your CMPs and CDPs. That's just really consent management platforms and customer data platforms as well that are able to identify within your ecosystem and your four walls on your website, stitching together that view of the user. There's a lot of prominence and advances as well that are happening with artificial intelligence. And this is an area that I think the industry has underutilized and one that's going to continue to increase as time goes on, which is all about how we can make decisions without humans being in there while using those sort of key inputs. Contextual, we've sort of gone through that and the signaling available there. Google Privacy Sandbox, which has a number of toolkits, Google Flock being one of those, Fledge and Turtledove being as well as part of those proposals to work on, cross-site understanding, but also understanding what's happening within your website for retargeting and remarketing purposes. We're seeing a lot of rise in publisher gardens as well. So classic examples of these are New York Times, the Washington Post with their Zeus platform. The big media owners are getting quite smart about understanding, the data that they have and creating ways in which advertisers and brands can engage with them to buy their audiences, and they're commanding good premiums. But what about the long tail of media owners and publishers? What are they going to be doing there? And then lastly, is data clean rooms. So we're seeing a big rise in new technologies that really make it easy for brands, agencies to really share the information that they have with another party, whether that's in a safe haven, to be able to create things around second-party data and enriching what you already have with your first-party data and coalescing that with others that you might be working with as well. So there's a lot of emerging toolkits on the scene, and it's a very exciting time to be in digital in the industry that we're in, because a lot of these solutions really allow us to think beyond the cookie and the third-party cookie in more specificity. As we go into ethics and consumer profiling, we're going to kind of dive into applications that went well and that haven't gone well. So, privacy regulation is shifting in the digital landscape, but, there's three elements on the left here that we see, that we need to really be mindful of in terms of the use and the appropriate stitching together of the consumer journey. And I'll take Target as the first example, where there's a famous piece where they did a direct mail campaign, and they were targeting a young girl of 15, 16 years old, and at the household level received a pregnancy coupons for some nappies and diapers and things of that nature. So, these kinds of considerations really need to be made. And this was not an appropriate use of data at the time. It's been an unethical use of data, essentially. And, we also need to act and think like consumers, when we're devising strategies and thinking about, what the right use is around this. So while the accuracy was there with Target, the thought process around the ethics and the right use of data was not there, right? Was it appropriate to send a 15, 16-year-old that lives at home with her parents coupons and good discounts for things like diapers? We can also see Facebook as well having some recent fines by the FTC and the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK in 2019, and Google as well more recently getting fined. But more importantly, what's happening with these things? I think that's the key thing, is around enforcement, and there's a lot of things happening within this space. So within the European Union, there's a Digital Services Act that's been passed for specific platforms around abuse, hate speech, and monitoring of these elements, and really coming down on the platforms in social to really regulate and be a lot more at the forefront of these elements. The e-privacy regulation as well coming into full force in the UK. TikTok as well being sued out in the Netherlands for children's regulation. And how do these platforms ultimately, tie in with doing what's right? We also have a lot of new antitrust lawsuits that have been recently announced by the United States, as we can see in the bottom 5 here. New York is also getting ready to pass theirs. And this is all to do with innovation, ensuring that there's a fair, level playing field for all platforms to coexist out there. So what does good look like? We've got 4 key areas. What should you be doing? How can you make sure that we're doing good things? So first is around consent, making sure that the data that you have available is properly consented. Is that list up to date? Ensuring that you do the due diligence with third parties, making sure that the management of that is there. The third element is understanding user expectations. And the fourth is being around profiling. We're also consumers at the end of the day, and we also need to act and think like that when devising, good marketing strategies or good digital advertising, because we're going out to users, not data. So as we think about growing brand trust, there are a multitude of benefits across the entire ecosystem and the customer journey. But we need to define what trust really is. And trust is really common within the neuroscience of the human brain. And this graphic really hits home on some of those key elements. Notice, attend, follow, sense. These are all words that are very common across all humans. But the problem is we're not applying the same setups, we're not applying the same rigor and the same standards across different platforms. And this is what's making it real difficult to ensure that we're getting the right outcomes for consumers at the end of the day. But within the human brain, trust is common across a majority of all elements. And we need to ensure that we're developing the right standards as we go forward with the regulations that I showed you on the prior slide, that we develop these standards to ensure that there's a level playing field, but also in baking in trust at the heart and forefront, and really elevating those trust scores for our industry, as we've seen with the banking industry or with doctors as well. That's how we're going to elevate trust. And, the key thing to this, to grow brand trust, it needs to be earned. It's not just going to happen overnight. You need to put effort, time, energy, resources. Needs to be top down, bottom up, left to right, side to side, everything. It needs to be earned first from your consumers before you can even grow it. So I'm going to go into 4 areas. Trust really wins with consumers. We've seen that many times over as one of the key elements. And what we need to do as brands is really consider how you're different and how that difference resonates. I think this is quite crucial in today's world, especially as we're thinking about, the newer environmental, societal governance elements of, what's at the heart of consumers and how do we connect with them emotionally, because we know that trust wins business. Trust also drives purchases and really influences the consumer. And ultimately, we need to think and observe and listen and move beyond using sales data and surveys and really be listening and thinking about how we can increase trust. And using things like sales and surveys, these are lagging indicators. By the time you realize sales are down, it's going to be too late in the game. Changing your market positioning, understanding how your differences are and how they resonate in marketplace. This is going to be a very expensive job to do. A lot of your top talent are going to be burnt out. They may have moved on by then. And it's going to be really difficult for you to rebound off those sales coming back up into the organization. The third element here is looking at trust, and it really earns loyalty. And, one of the things that we need to do and stay focused and hungry about is being paranoid every day about trust and each step of the way, and being hungry to, really think about how can I get better at trust every day. This needs to be part of your ethos, your ecosystem, and even having a simple notebook as to what you've accomplished at the end of the day. On top of that, how have you increased trust for your consumers? You have to stay hungry and be able to get that. And then fourthly, trust protects during reputational damages. Trust is seen to, really transform an organization, and consumers stand behind that brand, even if the brand is in the wrong. So think outside of your 4 walls, your own bubble, and really think about, trust and get inspiration outside of where you are, what you're focused on, and don't be so myopic. Think about different industries, different sectors, talk to people, get off your device, because, we need to think about other areas, as we've seen in the other earlier presentation, where trust is, critical to, driving that through, but how do we increase that trust overall? And then finally, just want to kind of conclude the presentation part of this is, the future is digital. We all know that. And, digital growth is really exploding, and it's already outstripping traditional media to be the dominant force. These things are COVID related. These things are even more profound than that as well, but we've seen a rapid rise in that. There needs to be a value exchange between the brand and the consumers, and this will always continue to be there. And it's quite important because these new platforms and publishers and media owners, need to have a good value exchange, and advertising is going to be key to all of this. To really fund media owners to ensure that we're putting out good content. Identity is debated, right? There's loads of different solutions out there. I think I looked at the identity graph solutions that are out there today, and I think there's about 85 of those. Not a single solution is going to exist out there on the open internet. Ethics and privacy, allow us to be responsible with advertising, doing what's beyond the law, and doing what's right by consumers. So we need to think beyond what's legal and lawful, and think about, what is right for the consumer. You're a customer as well. And finally, brands significantly outperform when they have customer trust at its heart. And that really leads to more sales, more revenue growth, more consistent trajectory, and also it defends the brand during bad reputational issues. And finally, knowledge is power, and it can help you overcome any fear of the unexpected. Especially when you learn, you gain more awareness through the process, and you know what pitfalls to look for as you get ready to transition to the next level. I think this quote is quite key. And it really hits home on the various elements of, embracing yourself and power and knowledge. So that sort of concludes the presentation format for today. And I'm going to be joined now by Iris, who will be, where we will be fielding some questions from the audience. So, hi Iris, I'm going to give a quick overview of Iris. Iris is a Senior Director at CarGurus and is leading everything around traffic acquisition. CarGurus is the most visited marketplace for the auto shopping in the United States, with presence in Canada as well as the UK. And Iris is passionate about strategy and analytics. She drives a strategic roadmap for a 9-figure performance marketing program, as well as execution and ROI evaluation across markets, along with leading a team of highly skilled marketing analysts, engineers, and data scientists. Previously, she's worked on personalization and retention at Wayfair, consulting technology companies, telecoms, and media companies on growth strategies at McKinsey, as well as Altman as well. So welcome, Iris.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Great to have you as well. So, one of the questions that's come from the audience has been, how have the required skill sets of a successful marketer changed over the last few years? And how best do companies incentivize customers to opt in with their first party data with the death of the third party cookie?
Sure. So in terms of the skill set, I think it's broader now. I think historically marketing was more concentrated on the top of funnel, and that was like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and offline. And then, as you mentioned, that with the transition online, that enabled and generated more like tracking and data. So what I see in terms of the skill set is more analytical. Now I think we're like analyzing and looking at consumer journeys and connecting the dots across the different types of the funnel. That is not linear anymore. So that combination of the consumer focus with the marketing expertise and creative and storytelling and the analytical is what I see the winning combination of the skill set for a marketer today.
Okay, excellent. And the second part of that question was, what are some strategies that companies can take to increase their first party data?
Yes, I think there is about earning the consent and the trust. As you mentioned in your presentation, I think it's about consumers opting in more than before, right? And I think there are a few ways to do that. One is being deliberate about the data uses and being transparent about that. People more than ever are shifting online. More and more people are shifting online, and then more things online. And consumers want to engage with what's relevant for them in their own terms. So aligning the data usage with supporting the user experience in a way that make it more personalized, more relevant, more convenient, or more engaging and fun, that's what earns the permission or the consent and that consumer engagement. That translates into the activity and participation with our brands, with our companies, and then that's when you get the first party data that then you're establishing that direct relationship with the user.
Excellent, thank you for that. Another good question that's kind of come in is, how are technology partners and publishers ensuring that there's positive ad experiences that really don't intrude on the end user experience?
I think it's given the consumer control over it. So first of all, being transparent about the data that is collected and how you're using it. That's first. And then second is giving the consumer some mechanisms to opt out, right? Or to control or tune in or tune out that engagement. Either that is a non-subscribe on an email or enable this mechanism to erase history. So it's basically giving that power to the consumer so they feel, so they can communicate and provide feedback to the brands on how they want to engage with us and how much. So we don't intrude and we don't like trespass that line.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost being quite clear and intentional with, you know, the data that's being collected and communicating that back to consumers. So that way they know from each element of the stage, you know, where they are in standing with the company.
Exactly.
Cool. All right, great. So, you know, in your experience, you know, from what you're seeing as well, you know, how is consumer behavior changing?
We see two major trends. One is, as we were talking about, the acceleration of online activity, particularly after this pandemic and the lockdowns. Then there was a big shift to online in a number of verticals, a number of industries that we're definitely seeing. Another major shift is higher expectations on that online experience, particularly around control and data protection. So with this privacy landscape shifting, and consumers want to engage, but they want to engage on their own terms. So who they connect with and how and in what instances. And they also expect those brands that they connect with to be responsible and to protect their data more and more than before. So consumers want to engage, but in what's relevant for them, and again, in their own terms.
Okay. Thank you for that. And we've got another hot topic and question that's coming from the audience. So the question that they've asked is, trust is a hard thing to measure and quantify. So how do companies go about doing that? And how do they actually measure it, but also build successfully their trust?
It's a very interesting question. One is with the engagement, really with the activity with you. I think people vote with their presence in brands. More specifically on trust, I think there are, like as advertisers, we have brand trackers and we have these social channels that more and more allow us to have that feedback loop and listen more and more what the consumers are saying. So being deliberate, again, about asking them questions through our social channels, through the surveys that we put to get a read on how we're doing and how we're delivering on the promises to the consumer is one way that we can specifically tackle the trust question. But also in general is, again, with the engagement with the brand, like people keep coming to us and then engaging in a way that is a signal, a strong signal for us that, okay, we're doing things right. Yeah,
and I'll also take that as well. It's very tough to measure and quantify, but I think, you know, to your point, it is, you know, one of the key questions that can be asked is how do we reduce friction, whether that's internally within and across teams, because we know that friction, you know, disintegrates trust. But when we remove friction, it increases morale. And it's, you know, usually small things. So what I would do is, if you're at the start of some of these things, is really ask your team and, you know, go about how can you remove friction within your team. From there, take some further steps as well, right? So think about maybe your lead generation process, whether that's you're a B2B company or a B2C company, is how is that currently working? You know, are there things that need to be efficient or more automated? And then more broadly, also think about the life cycle and user journey and the stages for your website. Because there's going to be areas of trust that can be created there too, small things to start off with. Another question that's come up is, you know, how do you sorry, it's getting to it again. There was a report recently that consumers are less likely to click on online ads because of privacy concerns. How do we engage with those sort of users that may not be willing to engage with advertising?
I think going back to what we were talking before is creating relevancy, right? People like, and it's twofold. One is creating like or growing that trust. And one way to do that is through that relevancy, and again, through the data protection, again, like across all the different processes that we have as a brand. And I think that engagement, like, so if when we put content in front of them, either that be an ad or recommendations or on the site, like whatever is content we're putting in front, if the first thing that people think about is like, if I engage with this, like my data could be at risk, or I'm going to be sharing something that I don't want, that's just not a good experience. But when you put content in front of them that is relevant, that is engaging, that, okay, this is interesting to me, or this is helpful for me, or this is fun, then that's something that, and they know you, or as a brand, you make it transparent on what the rules of engagement are, or what you're going to get out of them, then that goes away, right? That kind of concern dissipates, and consumers can emerge into like the experience, right? Or focus on that.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your time, Iris. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but it's been great having you on and getting for you to answer some of the questions that have come directly from the audience. So everyone on the call, thank you for joining us today. And I know that you've enjoyed our conversation on responsible advertising in the age of data privacy. The next session at 3:35, the final one, is the countdown to cookieless. And are you prepared with that? We'll begin at 3:35. And in this session, Lindsay Stewart, VP of Sales at InMarket, Goji Gupta, founder of Gupta Media, and Alex Binder, Vice President, Director at Group eConnect, will share their perspectives on whether Google's privacy sandbox initiatives like Flock or Turtle Dove are going to be effective replacements. And they'll also be discussing whether advertisers should kick off their identifier addiction once and for all. They're also going to be covering new frontiers advertisers are exploring, and discuss what sort of measurement strategies can ensure KPIs are built with the evolving regulation landscape in mind. And ultimately, to join the session and to get on to session 3, the countdown to cookieless, are you prepared? Click on the menu on the left. Enjoy that session. I hope you've had a lot of good fun on this one and learned lots. Thank you for your time, and till the next one, we'll see you then. Thank you.